My husband slapped me across the face on our wedding day, in front of everyone, because he said I disrespected his mother. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. My name is Ariel Johnson. I was 27 years old when I married Deshawn Carter. I worked as a nurse, proud of the life I built for myself. Deshawn was 29, charming, handsome, and an IT consultant. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. Everyone kept saying how lucky I was to have a man who adored me. That day, in my white dress, with flowers in my hands and my family around me, I thought I was the happiest woman alive. But his mother, Marvette, had other plans. From the very beginning, she made me feel like I wasn't good enough for her son. She whispered little comments under her breath, smiled politely in front of others. But every chance she got, she reminded me that no woman could ever truly measure up to her. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as nerves or tension, thinking maybe marriage would ease things between us. At the reception, when the music was playing and people were dancing, Marvette called out to me in front of the guests. She asked for a drink, as if I was her servant. I smiled politely, but I hesitated. I was in the middle of talking to my father, enjoying the only moment of calm I'd had that day. That hesitation was enough to light the fire. Before I could even turn around, Deshawn walked over, his face dark and angry. Without a word of warning, his hand struck across my cheek. The room went silent. My father's mouth dropped open, my mother gasped, and my cousin Nia rushed toward me. I stood frozen, my face burning, my heart pounding. He looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Don't you ever disrespect my mother again." People stared, too shocked to even move. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I forced a smile, pretending for the crowd that I could handle it, but inside I felt broken. I told myself to stay calm, to keep the peace, but deep down, I knew my life had just changed forever. The hall was still buzzing with music and chatter when the sound of his hand meeting my cheek cut through it like glass shattering. All the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the dancing feet, everything stopped. It felt like the room itself had frozen. My parents were on their feet in seconds. My father's chair scraped so hard across the floor that people flinched at the sound. My mother's hands trembled as she grabbed my arm, her eyes searching my face for damage. I wanted to melt into the ground, disappear before everyone's horrified stares. Deshawn didn't look ashamed. He didn't apologize, didn't even glance around to see the chaos he caused. He stood tall, jaw tight, as if what he had just done was the most natural thing in the world. He told everyone that I had been out of line, that I needed to learn respect, that it wasn't a slap, it was a lesson. He called it discipline, like I was a child misbehaving in front of his mother. I couldn't breathe. The shame burned hotter than the sting on my skin. Around me, voices whispered. Some guests looked away, pretending not to have seen. Others stared openly, waiting to see if I would explode or cry. My cousin Nia broke through the circle of people and put her arms around me, whispering that I should stay calm, that lashing out would only make it worse. She tried to shield me, but the damage was already done. My parents wanted to leave. I could feel it in their movements. My father's fists clenched at his sides, his anger radiating so strongly I thought he might strike Deshawn in return. My mother tugged gently at my wrist, urging me toward the door, but I stood still. I couldn't let this day, the day I had planned for months, the day our families gathered to celebrate, end in an all-out brawl. I couldn't let my parents carry the burden of creating a scene, even though I had just been humiliated in front of every friend and relative. So I swallowed it. My pride, my voice, everything inside me that wanted to scream. I straightened my shoulders, forced my lips into something that looked like a smile, and told my parents I was fine. My father's eyes narrowed in disbelief, but I held his gaze, silently begging him to trust me, to let me handle this my way. Deshawn carried on as though nothing had happened, ordering the DJ to turn the music back up, clapping his friends on the back, raising a toast. His mother sat smugly at her table, eyes shining with satisfaction, as if this was the moment she had waited for, to prove she would always come first. Inside me, however, something shifted. The woman who walked into that reception hall had dreamed of a life with him, had believed his promises, had imagined a future built on love. The woman standing there after that slap, after his cruel words and smug dismissal, was someone else entirely. I didn't speak it out loud, but I knew. A line had been crossed, and no amount of pretending could erase it. The rest of the evening dragged on like a nightmare in slow motion. Guests forced smiles, tried to restore the celebration, but I felt like a mannequin in a gown, going through motions that no longer mattered. Every cheer, every photo, every toast felt hollow. I had been marked, not by the slap on my face, but by the truth it revealed about the man I had just married. And though I kept my composure until the last guest left, I knew deep in my chest that what had cracked inside me would never heal the same again. The first morning after the wedding, I woke up in a house that didn't feel like mine. The walls were painted a dull beige, the furniture stiff and heavy, and there were pictures of Deshaun and his mother in nearly every room. Her smile followed me no matter where I turned. I tried to tell myself I'd get used to it, that I could make it warm with time. But from the very beginning it felt like I had stepped into her space, not ours. Marvette showed up without knocking, carrying bags of groceries as if she owned the place. She walked straight into the kitchen, commenting on how I had stacked the dishes wrong and left a streak on the counter. I tried to laugh it off, but her words weren't jokes. They were jabs, and each one landed deeper than the last. I cooked breakfast that morning, scrambled eggs and toast, and she tasted it like a food critic on a mission to destroy me. She told Deshaun it was bland, that I should learn how to season like a real wife. He didn't defend me. Instead, he nodded and said I should listen, that his mother knew best. That pattern didn't stop. Every day she came by with new advice, which sounded more like orders. My folding was sloppy, my voice too sharp, my hair not presentable enough for a wife. At first, I thought maybe she was testing me, but Deshaun's reaction crushed that hope. He stood behind her words as if they were law, telling me it was my duty to show respect. I wondered if respect meant shrinking into someone I wasn't, because that was the only way to keep peace in that house. Soon, Deshaun started making decisions for me without even asking. One afternoon, I reached for my wallet and realized my debit card was gone. When I asked about it, he said he had it, that it was better if he managed the money. I felt small, like a child waiting for permission. He also told me my night shifts at the hospital had to stop, claiming he didn't want me exhausted. But I could hear the real meaning. He wanted control over where I was and who I saw. The questions never ended. Why did I buy this? Why was I on the phone so long? Why didn't I call when I left work? Each one chipped away at my independence until silence seemed easier than answering. I learned to keep my thoughts tucked away, hidden from him, hidden from her. The only place I let myself be honest was in the small notebook I slipped between the mattress and the box spring. At night, when the house was quiet, I wrote down everything. The sting of his words, the ache of being watched, the fear that I was slowly disappearing inside a life I hadn't chosen. Those pages became my only safe space, a secret corner where I still existed. I didn't know what I would do with those words, or if they would ever leave the notebook, but writing them kept me from losing myself completely. In that house filled with Marvette's voice and Deshaun's rules, the journal became proof that I still had my own. When people saw us together outside the house, they thought we were the picture of love. Deshaun would open doors for me, pull out my chair at restaurants, and brag to his friends about how lucky he was. He would call me my queen in front of others, smile for every picture, and make it seem like he was the most devoted husband. Strangers admired us, and our families heard compliments about how well we fit together. On the surface, it looked like I had everything a woman could want. Behind closed doors, it was different. The kindness faded the moment the door shut. At home, my words carried no weight. If I suggested something, he brushed it off as silly. If I asked him for help, he told me I was nagging. Sometimes I wondered if the man smiling with his arm around me in public was a stranger I'd never met. The contrast was sharp, and it left me confused about which version was real. Marvette's voice made it worse. She rarely scolded me directly anymore, but she had her ways of planting doubts. At dinner, she would talk loudly about how women these days didn't know how to take care of a household. If I was nearby, her eyes would cut to me with that pointed look that needed no explanation. She told Deshaun in front of me that a wife should be able to cook meals that brought pride to the family, or that a woman should know when to stay quiet so her husband could lead. He nodded along, feeding into the script she had written for my role. The weight of her words pressed on me long after she left. I began to question myself. Was I failing as a wife, or was I simply refusing to become what she wanted? The doubt grew heavy enough that I finally turned to someone I trusted. Lachey, my closest friend since college, listened as I poured everything out one evening over coffee. I told her about the slap, about the rules, about the way I felt invisible in my own marriage. Her face tightened as I spoke, and she didn't sugarcoat her reply. She told me that men who use control don't stop, they escalate. She said that what I had experienced was not love. It was the beginning of something darker. Her words frightened me because deep down, I already knew she was right. Still, the idea of leaving so soon after the wedding felt unbearable. My family had invested so much in the celebration, in the union of our families. I imagined the whispers, the questions, the pitying looks from people who would say I had failed. Divorce after only a few weeks felt like dragging my parents through shame, and I couldn't stand the thought of them suffering because of my choices. So I stayed silent in front of others, keeping up appearances just as Deshawn did. But inside, I wrestled with the truth. The cracks were widening, and I could no longer pretend I didn't see them. My friend's warning echoed in my mind late at night when I couldn't sleep. I began to realize that love shouldn't make me feel small, and respect shouldn't mean erasing myself. Yet I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. I carried my secret turmoil quietly, while the perfect image we showed the world grew more fragile every day. The dinner was meant to bring both families together, a quiet Sunday meal where everyone could relax. My mother had prepared sweet potatoes, greens, and cornbread, bringing them to Deshawn's house as a gesture of peace. She wanted to show kindness despite the tension that had been growing since the wedding. The table was full, my father sitting proudly at the end, cousins chatting lightly, laughter sprinkled here and there. For a moment, I allowed myself to think maybe things could be civil. But Marvette never missed her chance. Between bites, she began making comments that cut sharper than knives. She leaned back in her chair, her voice rising just enough for the whole table to hear, and said my parents hadn't raised me properly. She claimed I lacked respect, that a woman's manners reflected the home she came from. Her words didn't just attack me, they struck directly at the two people I loved most. I felt the air change. My mother's smile faltered, and my father's jaw tightened. Their silence burned into me. I had let this woman pick at me day after day, but now she was dragging them through the mud. Something inside me snapped. I put my fork down and looked straight at her. For the first time, I didn't hold back. I told her she had no right to speak about my parents, that the only reason I showed her tolerance was because of the man I married. The words came fast, fueled by years of swallowed anger, and the table went silent. Deshawn's face hardened instantly. Without hesitation, his hand struck me across the cheek, the sound echoing against the walls. My body shook, not just from pain but from disbelief that he would hit me in front of my family. My father shot out of his chair, his fists curled, eyes blazing with fury. He looked ready to tear into Deshawn right there, to end the night in blood. I rushed to stop him, clutching his arm, begging him not to do it. My voice cracked as I pleaded with him to sit back down, to let it go for my sake. My father's chest rose and fell with rage, his glare fixed on the man who had just humiliated me again. My mother's hands trembled as she tried to calm him, whispering that violence would only make things worse. Eventually, with great effort, my father sat, but the fire in his eyes told me he would never forgive what had just happened. The rest of the meal dissolved into silence. No one tasted the food again. Conversations dried up, and the air was thick with tension. When my parents finally left, their faces carried a mixture of sorrow and helplessness that broke my heart. That night, lying in bed with tears drying on my skin, I stared into the darkness and made a promise to myself. This marriage would not last. I would not spend my life bowing to his hand or her tongue. But I would not leave quietly either. They had chosen to shame me, to reduce me, to wound the people I loved most. I swore that before I walked away, they would feel the weight of what they had done. They would know I was not as powerless as they believed. After that dinner, I stopped waiting for things to change. I realized no apology would come. No sudden kindness would erase what I had seen. If I wanted freedom, I would have to prepare for it myself. The thought stayed with me every hour of the day, and slowly, I began shaping a plan in silence. At work, I picked up extra shifts and tucked away small amounts of cash where no one could find it. I didn't keep it in the house. Deshawn had a habit of checking drawers and purses, so I opened a hidden account under my own name. Each deposit felt like a step toward air after being trapped underwater. It wasn't much at first, but even $20 gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. Around that time, I reached out to Terrence McLean, an old friend from college. He had studied law, and though we hadn't spoken in years, I trusted him enough to explain my situation. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to sound desperate, but he heard the truth between the lines. He didn't hesitate. He told me what rights I had, how to protect myself financially, and what evidence would matter in court. His voice carried a calm confidence that steadied me. He didn't make promises of revenge. He gave me tools. That was exactly what I needed. With his advice in mind, I began recording. Not openly, never recklessly. I downloaded an app that captured sound and slipped my phone on the counter during arguments. I kept the files backed up where Deshawn would never think to look. Each insult, each raised voice, each cruel word was locked away, a collection of proof for the day I walked away. My journal grew heavier too. What had once been a place to spill emotions became a ledger of events. I wrote the time, the date, what was said, how it ended. I forced myself to stay clear and factual, even when my hands shook with anger. Every page was a shield being built, line by line. Strangely, as I grew stronger in my secret work, Deshawn and Marvette became more relaxed around me. They mistook my quiet for surrender. When I stopped arguing, when I nodded at their instructions, they thought I was finally bending into the shape they wanted. He bragged that I was learning my role, and she smirked as if she had won. Inside, I held a different truth. I was only pretending. Each time I slipped money into my account, each time I stored another recording, I imagined the day I would use it all. I kept my eyes lowered, my tone soft, playing the part they needed me to play. The more they believed I was obedient, the safer my plan became. What they saw as weakness was really strategy. I carried my secret like a flame in my chest. Small, hidden, but powerful enough to burn everything down when the time was right. The first hint came one evening when Deshawn left his phone on the couch. He had stepped into the shower, and the screen lit up with a message that wasn't meant for my eyes. The words were playful, too intimate to be from a friend, and signed with a heart. My stomach turned, but I didn't move right away. I sat there, staring at the glow of the screen, my pulse thundering in my ears. When he came back into the room, I acted as if nothing had happened. I smiled when he talked about his day, nodded when he complained about work, all while my mind worked like a machine. If I confronted him too soon, he'd cover his tracks, and I would be left with nothing but suspicion. So I played the part of the clueless wife, while inside, something colder took root. The next few weeks, I began watching more closely. He started coming home late, brushing it off with excuses about long projects at the office. His shirt sometimes carried the faint scent of perfume I didn't wear. He kept his phone closer than before, face down on the table, locked with a password he hadn't bothered to use in the past. Each detail was small, but together they told a story he thought I was too naive to notice. I followed my instincts. When he left his phone unattended again, I moved quickly, snapping photos of messages between him and a woman named Candace Lee. She worked in his department, someone he had once described as just a colleague. The messages left no doubt. They arranged meetings, complimented each other in ways that went far beyond professional. I saved every screenshot, careful to back them up where he couldn't reach. One night, I told him I was working late and instead parked near a hotel close to his office. I waited, nerves wound tight, and then I saw them. Deshawn and Candace slipping inside, his hand brushing her back like it belonged there. I took photos through the windshield, my hands shaking but steady enough to capture the truth. I didn't cry. The tears had dried months ago, replaced by something sharper. The betrayal cut deeper than his hand ever had. Pain from a slap faded, but this wound bled in silence. He hadn't only disrespected me. He had mocked the vows we exchanged, mocked the life I had given up for him. I thought of the way he paraded me in public, smiling like a proud husband, while sneaking around with her behind closed doors. It made every compliment he gave me in front of others feel like a cruel joke. I didn't let him see my anger. I laughed at his stories, kissed him goodnight, and served dinner like nothing had changed. But inside, my patience solidified into steel. The recordings and journal had been weapons for my survival, but now I had something even stronger, proof of his betrayal. And I knew when the moment came, it would destroy not only him, but also the image of the perfect son Marvette worked so hard to protect. When Marvette's birthday approached, I offered to hold the dinner at our place. Deshawn was surprised by my eagerness, but I masked it with a smile and said I wanted to show my appreciation for his mother. He liked the idea, and Marvette, proud as ever, agreed without hesitation. They thought it was my way of finally falling in line, but I had something else in mind. I planned everything down to the smallest detail. The menu was carefully chosen, the table set with candles and flowers, every plate polished until it shone. I wanted no distractions, nothing that could shift the attention away from what was about to unfold. I invited both families, making sure my parents would be present, along with a few of Deshawn's closest friends. I also made a point to ask Terrence to attend, introducing him as an old friend from school. He blended in easily, smiling, chatting lightly, but I knew why I needed him there. The night began smoothly. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and Marvette basked in the attention as if the evening were a tribute to her greatness. Deshawn sat proudly at her side, telling stories about his work, making himself look like the dependable son and successful husband. The performance was flawless, the same act he always carried in public. But this time, I wasn't going to let it continue unchallenged. Halfway through the meal, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. My voice was steady, even though my heart pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away. Deshawn raised his glass toward me, thinking I was about to praise him. Instead, I reached for my phone. With one press, the room filled with his voice, not the charming tone they all knew, but the sharp, cruel one he used when no one else was around. The recording played his words clearly. How he thought my parents were beneath his family, how he laughed about controlling me, and finally, how Candace was a better escape than his own wife. Gasps rippled around the table. My mother's face went pale, my father's fists clenched under the table, and Deshawn froze, his mouth opening without sound. Before he could recover, I placed the photographs on the table one by one. Images of him with Candace outside the hotel, her hand on his arm, their closeness undeniable. No explanation could erase what was plain before their eyes. His friends shifted uncomfortably, Marvette's proud smile collapsed, and the air in the room grew heavy with silence. For the first time, his perfect image cracked wide open. The obedient son, the faithful husband, the man of respect, gone in an instant. All that remained was the truth, and it lay bare in front of everyone who had once praised him. I didn't yell. I didn't shed a tear. I simply stood there and let the evidence speak louder than anything I could ever say. And in that silence, the mask he had worn for so long shattered beyond repair. The silence after the recordings and photos lingered heavy, and I let it stretch long enough for every face at that table to fully absorb what they had heard and seen. Then I took a deep breath and spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. I told them I wasn't standing there as a helpless wife anymore. I explained that I had already filed for divorce, that Terrence had guided me through every step, and that the papers were in motion long before this night. Deshawn's head snapped toward me, his expression shifting from shock to fury. He demanded to know what I was talking about, but I didn't flinch. I laid it all out, piece by piece. I told him that the joint accounts he thought he controlled no longer existed, that every dollar I earned had been quietly moved into a place he couldn't touch. The credit cards were canceled, the bills separated, and the lease he believed tied me to him now bore only my name. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the stronghold he boasted about was nothing but smoke. My parents sat straighter, the grief they had carried replaced with relief. Deshawn tried to speak again, but his words stumbled. He wasn't in control anymore, and he knew it. That's when Marvette broke the silence. She slammed her hand against the table, her voice sharp with rage, calling me ungrateful, accusing me of tearing down her family. She shouted that I would regret this, that no one would respect me after walking away. Her face was red, her voice shrill, but her power over me had vanished. For the first time, I laughed, not from humor, but from freedom. I laughed because the woman who had spent months trying to make me feel small was now powerless to stop me. The laughter cut through her rant like a blade, and Deshawn lost control. He pushed his chair back and lunged toward me, his face twisted with anger. But before he could reach me, my father was on his feet, and Terrence stepped forward as well. They held him back, their grip firm as he struggled against them. The sight of him thrashing, unable to reach me, was the final confirmation of everything I already knew. He wasn't a man, he was a bully stripped of his stage. I stood tall, straightened my dress, and looked him in the eye one last time. There were no tears, no fear, no hesitation. I told him he could keep the house, the furniture, even the photographs of his so-called happy life. I wanted none of it. All I took with me was my dignity, and that was something he could never touch again. With that, I turned and walked out. My parents followed close behind, Terrence steady at my side. Behind me, I left a table full of silence, a man seething with rage, and a mother whose pride had crumbled into dust. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I felt weightless. The weeks after I left were not easy, but they were mine. I signed the lease for a small apartment with pale blue walls and big windows that let in the morning light. It wasn't fancy, but every corner felt like freedom. I bought my own dishes, my own blankets, and arranged the space exactly how I wanted. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without waiting for someone's criticism. I returned to night shifts at the hospital, the ones Deshawn had once forced me to quit. The hours were long, but I welcomed them. Caring for patients reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart, a woman with purpose, capable of standing on her own. Each paycheck I received with my name alone gave me a sense of pride I hadn't felt since before the wedding. Nia came by one evening, bringing takeout and laughter, filling my little place with warmth. Later, Lachey joined us, and I finally told them everything. I spoke about the slap on my wedding day, the constant control, the recordings, and finally the betrayal that sealed it all. They listened without interruption, their eyes shining with both sadness and pride. I admitted that, strangely enough, I didn't regret marrying him. It had shown me the limits of what I would endure, and the strength I didn't know I carried. That night, when the apartment was quiet again, I pulled my journal from the drawer. The pages were filled with pain, dates, and memories I never wanted to relive. But before closing it for good, I wrote one last line. The slap that broke me became the slap that set me free. I placed the journal on the shelf and walked to the window. The city lights stretched out in the distance, steady and alive, and I stood there watching them with steady breath. I wasn't the same woman who had once bowed her head in shame. I wasn't the bride who had stood silent after being struck. I was someone new, someone who had taken betrayal and turned it into strength. The night outside was wide open, and for the first time, so was I. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away from Deshawn and his family after everything they put me through, or should I have stayed and tried to forgive? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, please subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so you never miss one.